Hi guys, today I'm going to share a great pizza dough recipe with you, and I'm going to give you some great tips for working with pizza dough, because we do run a lot of recipes for pizza in the magazine, and it's come to my attention that people often have a lot of questions about what's the right kind of pizza dough to get? How do I shape it? What do I do if it springs back when I'm working with it? What's the right temperature to bake it at? All of these things are things that we often will cover in recipes, but sometimes people just want to make pizza and they don't want to follow a recipe. So I'm going to share our great pizza dough recipe with you, and I'm going to share some tips that would sort of apply to homemade pizza dough or store-bought dough. I am starting off by blooming my yeast for this pizza dough. It's 2/3 of a cup of warm water, 1 package of dry yeast, not the instant kind, just regular active dry yeast, and a teaspoon of sugar. The sugar is going to help activate the yeast a little bit more quickly, and the water is a little bit warm, which also helps. You stir those together and then let it sit just until it starts to look foamy. The only reason that you're really doing that is to ensure that you know that your yeast is active and that it will actually make your dough rise. So you want to let that sit for about 5 minutes. And you should start seeing pretty quickly little bubbles coming up to the top of the water, and that's how you know that your yeast is active. All right, so look, you guys, you can see that it's already happening, which is great. Sometimes it's slightly less active and it doesn't foam up quite as quickly, and maybe you're concerned, but then you move ahead anyway, which is what I always do. So I'm just gonna move along with my recipe. I don't need to wait much longer than this. You stir in your flour. It's 1 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour. You can use a combination of all-purpose flour and bread flour if you want a little bit more chew to your dough, but this is a very simple, straightforward recipe using ingredients that you have if you bake at home, except maybe you don't have the yeast. Go out and get the yeast, keep it in your refrigerator. A tablespoon of olive oil and a 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. I use Diamond Crystal Kosher Salt, which is slightly less salty. If you're using Morton's, use about a teaspoon or 3/4 teaspoon. Stir your ingredients together until you get, like, it's a raggedy mixture. This is actually coming together pretty well. You can see that it's already a dough, and then turn it out onto your surface because you're going to want to knead this by hand. You can do it in machine. Some people even make their pizza dough and their pasta dough too in a food processor, but it's so easy, there's really no reason to do that. Now you want to knead your dough. You need some flour because this is actually kind of a wet dough, which actually will end up making it easier to work with in the end. I think one of the issues people come across with store-bought dough is it's actually quite tight. That's like I know that it sounds like I'm just describing it, but it's actually a term that's used in bread baking, and that applies to pizza dough as well, where a dough is very hard. So it's like stiff, and it makes it harder to stretch up to a certain point. And then if the dough's too wet, like certain kinds of rustic bread doughs that come with the all the holes and stuff, that actually can be hard to work with as well because it's too wet. This dough results in a nice soft dough that's actually quite easy to work with, and it's very easy, and it only takes about 5 minutes to make. And you can see that I just sprinkled it with a little bit of flour, and it's already almost smooth and almost not sticking. And the goal is to get a dough that doesn't really stick to your hands as you're kneading it, and that is sort of smooth and forms a really nice little ball. That can take about 5 minutes. Playing with dough, it's a lot of fun and very satisfying, and watching it rise and do all of the things that it's meant to do is a really satisfying thing. But I do completely understand that you might want the convenience of a store-bought dough, and I'm going to share some tips about how to deal with that as well. This seems good. It's nice and smooth. You can see springy. I've been developing a little bit of the gluten by kneading it, which means that it's getting nice and stretchy. The stretchiness is important in the texture of your final pizza, but it is one of the things that can make it challenging to work with, so you have to learn how to deal with that. Brush a bowl, a clean bowl, with oil. This is where the dough will rise. I like to take the rounded side, roll it a little bit in the oil, turn it over, and then cover with plastic wrap. And you can let this rise in the refrigerator overnight if you want to, if you want something make ahead, or just at room temperature for about an hour or an hour and a half, depends on the temperature of your room, and it needs to double in volume. So once your dough has risen, it's ready to start shaping. Now here's where I think people run into some issues. The first thing that happens when you touch a dough after it's been risen is all of the air that's incorporated into it as it was rising come out of it. And the minute you touch it, you are slightly reactivating the gluten, and the gluten is what makes it springy. It also makes it chewy, it gives it great texture, but it also can cause some problems when you are trying to shape your dough. Like you start shaping it and all of a sudden it starts going, shrinks back on itself. This is particularly a problem, I think, with store-bought doughs, which are a little bit tighter, just like I said. So you have to take a little bit more care and a little bit more time when you're working with a store-bought dough. What I would recommend is take your store-bought dough out of the package and put it into a bowl, just like I had my dough rising in a bowl, oiled bowl maybe. Let it rest for like 15, 20 minutes. I know this is something that you might feel like you don't have time for, but it's gonna make it easier right off the bat to work with your dough, because the minute you take it out of that plastic package, it's activating that gluten and it's pulling back on itself, right? That's what happens when you also take it out of the bowl. So you wanna give the gluten in the dough time to relax. And if you don't give it time, it's not gonna be relaxed. So just give yourself a little bit of time and give your dough a little bit of time. All right, I've given myself enough time. I'm gonna try to start stretching the dough. Once your dough has relaxed, it should start feeling much easier to work with. This time, I'm going to do my dough on an oiled sheet pan, and I'm gonna just stretch it out with my hands into a rectangle. Depending on the recipe that you're using, or if you're just winging it, your dough can either be stretched into a rectangle or an oblong or into a round. So to stretch your dough, you just want to start gently moving the dough with your hands. And you can see that it is springing back. Like that's something that's going to happen to everybody. The goal is to get a dough that has a little bit more of a border built up on the edges. So what I like to do is use my fingers to press the dough out, but don't go over the edges. Like don't mush down the edges, because then you won't have that sort of nice puffy border that you come to expect with pizza. And then just stretch the dough. So this is a pound of dough, which is what the yield is for that recipe that I made with the 1 3/4 cups of flour. And you should easily, if you give it enough time, be able to stretch this dough into, to fit into a 1/4 sheet pan, which is smaller than this. This is a 1/2 sheet pan. Nicely. That's about a 9.5 by 12.5. And I can see already that because I let this sit, I'm having no problems stretching this out. However, if for some reason I had let this sit for 10 minutes after I took it out of the bowl and it was springing, it was still really springing back, and I was really struggling to get it into the shape that I wanted, I would walk away again. Cover it with a little bit of a clean kitchen towel, and just do something else for a few minutes. It's really, I feel like the most important ingredient in getting dough into the shape that you want is giving it time. So the gluten needs to relax. The dough just sometimes needs to sit in order to be able to shape the way that you want it to. Just give your dough time and you really shouldn't have a problem. Like here's my dough in the size that these great recipes that you're gonna see later are made. It's 9.5 by 13 dough. Pretty easy. Now I thought, you know, I have another dough. I'll show you how to make rounds. Why not? Also, if you're looking for great pizza recipes, we've got tons of them on marthastewart.com, so look for great recipes. But you really should be able to make your own pizza without a recipe using these tips. So this was the same dough. It's about a pound of dough. I just took it out of the bowl, so it's going to have gotten a little bit tighter. I can feel already that it's springy. It's amazing how quickly that happens. Like you can't even believe that just the moving of the dough from the bowl to the counter is going to do that, but it really does. It makes a really big difference. So just let it sit. This dough is a pound of dough. I'm going to cut it into 2 pieces. And then the first thing that I'm going to do before I let it rest is shape those pieces into balls. You can roll it like you're making a boule, you know, bread, but you want it to be in a ball first. That's one of the keys to getting your dough to actually be round once you shape it. If you're starting off with it not being round and not being in a ball like this, it's gonna be a lot harder to get into the shape you want. So this is how you wanna rest your dough. You wanna rest it in a ball. Just so that these guys don't dry out while they're resting, I'm gonna cover them with the bowl that they were rising in before. And that'll keep the tops from getting crusty. All right, let's see if these have rested enough. I don't really know if they have. It's been about 5 minutes, which is a little bit short. Sometimes recipes will say to let these rest in this shape for 30 minutes, which is a really nice long time and makes it a dream to work with, but I'm gonna see if I can get it to work like faster. And now this is where people run into problems, right? They're trying to make things work faster, but let's see if it is going to work faster. One of the ways I've seen this done is kind of cool. You make a little pile of flour on your surface, and then you place your dough on top of that flour to start shaping it, and then you just press it out. And I'm doing a very similar thing where I'm pressing the dough out with my fingers from the center out, leaving a little bit of a rim. Then I pick it up and use the back of my hands to shape the dough into a round. And I'm using the back of my hands and my knuckles to pull the dough slightly out, and I'm still leaving that sort of puffy rim, the little edge, and not getting it, not flattening that out. So I'm not pulling it so much so that I'm going past the edge, because I still want to maintain that nice sort of puffy edge that you get on a pizza. Put this back down. You can see that because I started it in a round, it's still in a really, really nice round. It's a great way to ensure that your dough sort of never gets misshapen, is starting your dough in a round like that. Now, you can make this as thick or as thin as you want. This is 1/2 pound, so I wouldn't go bigger than about 9 inches. But you can see, I know that my hand span is about 8 inches, so this is just slightly bigger than 8 inches. And while it's not like an extremely, extremely perfect round, but it's pretty good. It's not misshapen. Starting it in that ball like that really, really, really helped. Letting it rest really helped. At this point, if I was moving on in this recipe, I would lay this on a parchment paper lined baking sheet, or on a pizza peel lined with a piece of parchment paper. And then you can slide the entire thing, parchment and all, onto a baking stone or onto a, sometimes in recipes we'll call to put a baking sheet turned upside down in the oven, and you can slide the whole thing on there if you don't have a pizza peel. So again, let it rest, shape it into a round before you start shaping it. Start shaping it on a mound of flour just to hold it so that it doesn't stick, and then finish shaping it over the back of your hands. I hope that I answered all of your pizza dough shaping questions. If you're looking for great pizza recipes, go to marthastewart.com. We have tons of great recipes for round pizzas, rectangular pizzas, deep dish pizzas, all the pizzas that you can want. If you have more questions about pizza or anything else, write in the comments below. If you like recipes like this and you want more, make sure to click like and subscribe, because we have plenty more where this came from.